So this would be kind of the classic setup that a lot of people started with, is kind of having either one person or a very small team that are kind of consuming everything. They're kind of trying to tap into all the different sources and kind of taking those internally into their laptop, let's say, and kind of using that to generate some sort of output that other people within the organization are going to consume, and kind of see if they can use that to kind of communicate the insight. So we saw this a lot, I think, at the beginning of the industry, and maybe it has moved on a little bit. And if you've got some very capable and experienced kind of team members building out this whole pipeline, they might have evolved from kind of CSVs in your work laptop to actual kind of some sort of cloud infrastructure around this, and that maintains all this data and kind of centralizes and everything like that. What I will say about the space, I took a quote from an article that Simon McMillan, who's our CEO, wrote a couple of months ago, and he, kind of the outline is that there's a bit of a dissonance between the expectation versus the reality in this space, in the sense that you have the expectation that with a small team, with a couple of very kind of talented individuals, you're going to be able to streamline a whole kind of pipeline from data providers, kind of normalizing it, integrating, making it available, kind of storing it, putting it in in some sort of infrastructure that you can then access and then answer all the right questions and communicate those in the most effective ways and the most efficient ways, and you can kind of be able to set up that whole pipeline via kind of a small team of kind of, let's say, data scientists or analysts. And the reality is very different, right? Because the reality is that to kind of effectively work with all this data, you kind of need a much more wider kind of set of skills that aren't necessarily easy to kind of set up with a small team, and you need kind of a larger team over a long time, kind of doing a lot of activities around the data to be able to actually use it. Just to give you an example in this, like we ourselves at 23, we have a semi-large team, or a larger team than you would find within many clubs of engineers, developers, data scientists, subject matter experts, and we're still, without the pressures of kind of match weeks and day-to-day results, we still kind of have, it fills the hours of our working week every week, just even maintaining, kind of doing this sort of thing. So so the reality in this space is much more complicated, and I do kind of think that when you're in this kind of setup, how much time do you actually have to spend, how much energy do you have to spend on the activities that really matter, on kind of finding that bit of insight, on kind of developing some sort of representation of a playing style or something that fits your club philosophy, et cetera. The energy and time spent on the things that aren't where the edge is at kind of takes away, there's an opportunity cost in the time spent on actually doing the things that you want to be doing to actually gain an edge. And I would say, I would argue that this isn't what you want your team to be doing day in, day out, if you've kind of got a small team, especially. So another kind of thing that we've seen in the space is something like this. So let's say kind of a fragmented delivery in terms of access and interaction with the data. So, you might have an event data provider that has a user interface so that you can kind of look at their data in their user interface and ask some questions. Something else that we see is that tracking data providers kind of focus a lot on extracting some physical metrics from their tracking data, and they might provide those via a CSV that they give access to you in some sort of way. But what you have is kind of very fragmented and siloed access through different toolings and different kind of sources to all the different data kind of that's accessible out there. And you kind of have to, get to grips with all kind of this fragmented and differentiated way of dealing with all the data. It's actually something that we've seen with some clubs that we've worked with, that you kind of see the performance analysis team using one data provider and using a certain tool to access that data provider, and the recruitment analysis team could use a completely different provider and a completely different way of accessing that data, et cetera. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this, per se, because ultimately you want to be able to access everything. You want to get the right insight from the right places where it's available, et cetera. So it's not that it's not that I'm saying that it's wrong to kind of deal with different providers, to deal with different types of data coming from different places. But I would say that if you want to develop an edge over your opponents, you want to develop organizational capabilities, you want to develop centralized workflows, you want to develop the right types of collaboration and communication across teams, that that kind of there's a central repository of things that you do and that you're trying to get access to, instead of kind of this disparate view. And fragmentation of the delivery is definitely not conducive to developing this sort of internal capability. And the other thing that I would say here is that, let's face it, there's really no incentive for providers themselves to help you integrate easily with other with the tools from other providers, in the sense that providers want to capture the totality of your budget, really, in terms of accessing data. So they want to capture as much as they can. So in that way, there's not really a huge incentive for them to kind of interact with other tools. So this kind of setup is let's say acceptable to a certain point from the data provider perspective. Right. So one more thing I want to mention here is that the other thing is the space has become very bloated. We've seen over the last couple of years that there has become a huge kind of provision of insight and of kind of services from third parties. So this could be consultants, this could be, as I said, third party companies, this could even be the providers themselves, kind of making some applications. And just for the sake of argument, let's suppose that this is a recruitment based tool in which they want to output player ratings in this sort of black box of data science. And I call it a black box because you're not sure exactly what goes in, but it has an output and you're being asked to interact with this output to kind of consume what this kind of this black box is kind of giving you. And there's also a huge provision of all these different things in the industry of look at this model, look at this thing, look at this other thing. And let's face it, this could be a dud. First of all, it will take a lot of energy to kind of even triage all the different things that are out in the industry and being able to kind of differentiate what's useful and what's not. But that's not the point that I want to make at all, because don't get me wrong, there could be some extremely interesting things going on here. So you could have a team of really smart people that are using computer vision on broadcast data to kind of identify the body orientation of players when they receive the ball. And they're using that to kind of produce some sort of indicators of seating on the half turn and half spaces and letting you kind of progress. So there could be some fascinating things going on here that you definitely want to tune into. You want to access all the insight that's available. So the problem isn't that, but the problem is kind of the how, right? So what I would say is that in the industry, you have a lot of things that are not just, anything that's kind of provided by a third party that you don't develop internally is kind of not only being served to your organization, but it's being served to your opponents, it's being served to everybody. Essentially, it's being broadcasted from this black box. And if your way of dealing with what's available out in the industry is kind of just taking this and adding it to your long list of fragmented tools that you want to kind of tune into, I think you are kind of playing at kind of playing the strategy of not falling behind, playing catch up, of doing that sort of thing, as opposed to kind of developing the edge and developing the internal capabilities that I've been alluding to all this time.